There we go. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy Monday. Hopefully everybody's ready for another amazing chat and learn with Power to Fly. My name's Meg. I'm part of Power to Fly's virtual hosting team, and I'm really excited to get us started on today's session with two of the amazing women from PagerDuty. Now, before we jump into our questions for the day and you get to meet our speakers, I just want to go over some real quick housekeeping items for you. So we really encourage audience participation. These events are all about you. And if you took time out of your day to be here with us for the live recording, we want to make sure that you get a chance to participate if you would like. So if you want to add questions or comments, if you want to address the speakers at all, please feel free to. You can do that in a couple different ways. You can come off mute if you would like. That will make you show up on our live recording. If you don't have audio capabilities or if you have like privacy issues, don't sweat. As long as you don't come off mute, you won't show up in today's live recording or in our live stream. You can still participate. All you have to do is put your questions or comments into the group, into the Zoom group chat. You'll be able to see that in your Zoom panel. I'm also going to keep adding links into that group chat as well. So that way y'all can, kind of keep up on what we're all talking about with the PagerDuty team. So just, you can always keep, add questions or comments in there. You can also DM them to me. I'm happy to raise your questions and keep you anonymous for whatever reason you have. Doesn't matter. I'm happy to do it. Now, like I said, today's session is being recorded as well as live streamed, to our YouTube site or YouTube channel. I'm sorry. So whether you come for 5 minutes, you leave and bounce in and out, doesn't matter. Don't feel like you have to take notes because you can always review the recording later. And in about 1 to 2 business days, everyone that registered, whether you showed up or not, everyone will get an email with a link from Power to Fly where you can go to rewatch this recording. Now, if Dileshni or Paula say something just mind-blowing today and you cannot wait to share it with a coworker or a relative or a friend, you don't have to wait those 1 to 2 days. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. It's the Power to Fly Chat and Learns channel specifically. I'll share links for that in the chat here in just a moment. But that is where you can check out our whole page. You'll have access to a whole library of past chat sessions we've done. There's a bunch of really great stuff on that page, but I definitely recommend that you go and check that out. Especially if you want to share this immediately once it's over. The recording is usually posted there within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of the live stream. Now, like I said, if you do have other questions, troubleshooting, anything at all, please feel free. You can put that in the chat. You can also DM me. And don't forget, if you do go over and check out our YouTube channel, I very much recommend that you subscribe. It is an awesome way to make sure that you don't miss out on great events like today without cluttering up your inbox. You can also follow us on various social media channels. We are at Power to Fly on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So hopefully y'all will keep up with us and stay up to date with what we're up to, what resources we have for you on some of those various channels. Now, before we go into our next section, I just want to highlight, obviously, our guests are here today on behalf of PagerDuty. I'm putting a link into the chat where you can go to check out PagerDuty's company page on powertofly.com. It's going to look much like what you're seeing in front of you here. I believe right now there's actually more roles posted with Power to Fly. It looks like... let's see. Yeah, there's 61 roles currently. So hopefully something there will kind of spark your interest. But this is a really good page to check out. It'll give you a lot of information about PagerDuty, especially if you're interested in working for them. You can check out their open roles under the jobs tab. You can also take a look at that events tab. That's going to show you past events that they have partnered on with us, as well as events coming up in the future. So if you do get an interview with PagerDuty and you want to make sure that you've got questions to ask or you are knowledgeable about what they've got going on lately, those past chats are a great way to kind of brush up and do maybe a little bit more fun research on a company before you go into an interview. You can also follow them right there. There's going to be a big follow button at the upper right hand corner of the page. I definitely recommend clicking that follow button if you are either actively job hunting, interested in PagerDuty, or if you are looking at the roles and you're really interested, but nothing really suits you right now. Go ahead and click that follow button. It's going to let PagerDuty know that you are interested in working with them even before you fill out an application, but it's also going to let you know when they post new roles. So it's going to keep you, kind of keep you up to date with PagerDuty so you know what's going on and you don't lose sight of them. Even if you're not actively seeking now, if you're just kind of keeping your options open or keeping your ears pricked to see what's going on, it's a good way to make sure that you stay up to date on what PagerDuty has going on. All right, now I'm really excited to introduce you to our two speakers today. First up is Dileshni. Dileshni is a senior engineering manager at PagerDuty, and she's responsible for the teams that build the Run Deck product line. Prior to becoming an engineering manager, Dileshni worked as a software engineer for almost 10 years in various companies and industries such as Unada, which was acquired by Instacart, FreshBooks, and the University of Toronto. And up until 2020, Dileshni also ran a successful tech meetup in Toronto that focused on mentoring and growing tech speakers within the Toronto tech community, where 60% of the speakers are women. So thank you so much, Dileshni, for joining us today. We're really happy to have you. Is there anything you'd like to add to that introduction before we introduce your co-speaker today?
No, I think you did a great job, and I'm excited to be here.
Us too. We're so happy to have you. Thank you. All right, so joining Dileshni from PagerDuty is also Paula. Paula is currently the Senior Director of Infrastructure at PagerDuty. She leads teams who are responsible for architecting, evolving, and supporting the sustainability and reliability of the PagerDuty platform. Paula's past roles include serving as a digital executive at large global public companies such as General Dynamics and United Technologies. And prior to those leadership roles, Paula held individual contributor roles in customer support, software engineering, data science, and network engineering. So two women who have absolutely been in your shoes if you are also here, kind of hoping to learn a little bit more about that interesting decision between management and individual contributor. Paula, do you have anything that you'd like to add to your intro before we keep going?
Yeah, well, I feel like I ought to explain the crazy laundry list of individual contributor roles and maybe segue a little into our topic today.
Yeah, please.
I started my career in the mid 90s, right when the internet was taking off for an internet dial-up company, as I teased back when the internet used to come on CD. That's not quite true, but, so I started off just doing customer support in that company, and ended up in sort of the networking world a little bit. And then decided that maybe I should go get a degree in this, and went to school and studied math and got into software engineering, sort of data science flavored, and what you might call full stack, although I think full stack 20 years ago looks a lot different than what it looks like today. And really did a full solid 15 years of individual contributor roles across a span of roles before kind of dabbling in management a few times and then going back into individual contributor. And then really, I think the sort of pivotal moment for me was about 12 years ago when I took on sort of a more solid leadership role in the sort of infrastructure space, and have kind of been doing leadership transformation since then. So I guess just by way of background and sort of a conversation for today, there's lots of ways to move around your career other than staying in your current lane or switching from individual contributor to management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for kind of expanding on that for us. Now, before we jump into questions today, I just want to highlight, so what you're seeing today are some of the principal themes that we're going to try and cover in today's conversation. Now, we identified these both by, prep work with Dileshni and Paula, but also by looking at the questions that y'all submitted ahead of today's session. Now, one thing to know is that we're going to try and touch on these. If we, I don't know that we've ever gotten to all the questions we wanted to ask, but if you are here with us and you want to make sure that you get your question answered, we want to know that you are absolutely empowered to drive today's conversation. You, like I said, you took time out of your day to be here with us live instead of just watching the recording later. No hate on the people that just come to watch the recording. That's totally fine. But if you came here to be with us now, if you want to dig in deeper on something, let us know. If you want to ask questions about, what the, if you want to, oh, sorry, y'all, I just went to the wrong slide. There you go. If you want to ask questions about, diving deeper on something that Paula or Dileshni has said, please let us know. If we address one of your questions, and let's say we're just not really coming at it from the right angle, please feel free to, give us some more context, give us some more information. And the other thing to know is that if you have a question that you wrote in and you're not sure if we're going to get to it yet, please feel free to, kind of chime in and let us know. what you want to know more about, please feel free to let us know. So as we keep going through our session here, I am going to, highlight that for people. I will keep reminding you guys to, come off mute or to ask questions or to add comments, whatever you'd like. But just so you're aware, I'll keep reminding us all of this. So we're going to try and cover some of these areas. We're going to talk about some key skills to help you grow as a manager or as an IC. We're going to talk about some ways to understand if the role serves you as well as your career goals. And we're going to discuss some ways to ease the transition from one role into another. So to get us started, I know we had a lot of questions that were asked today, in advance of this session. I do want to start off with one of the questions we were asked a lot. I'm going to address the questions to both of you. So please feel free if you'd like to, jump in, or if one of you wants to take it first, please feel free to do that. So the first question we got was, what are the specific skill similarities between senior ICs and management? And can you talk about what are some of the skill differences as well? So I thought this is a really interesting question. Dileshni, would you like to take this first?
Sure. So I'm going to speak to primarily from how we look at it at PagerDuty. The similarities are between senior engineers and eng managers is you still have to have the core technical skills of understanding what you're building, what kind of trade-offs you're going to have to make, what does this mean in terms of long-term impact on the services that you're building. Collaboration is key for managers and for senior engineers, because you're not just not optimizing for your team, you're optimizing across teams, across the org. And it's a really important skill to have, being able to communicate with others, communicate your ideas to them and collaborate with them. And then the next two pieces are around business impact, which I think is really important. Is as managers and senior ICs, you're going to be faced with, we want to do all these things, or these are all the decisions that we can make, these are all the trade-offs we can make, but what's the impact in terms of what's the impact to the business, to the team, what's the impact longer term? Kind of have to be able to think through that and be able to communicate it. And the last part is leadership. So, it's leading teams, how you grow teams, how you mentor others, how you help level up those around you.
Yeah, and I guess if I could just build on it, I would say the main thing that happens as you progress in your career, just in general, is the transition that you make over time from having an individual impact to the impact you have on others. And I think if you look at a senior leadership ladder, and in a lot of companies, that's a staff or principal, or maybe an architect, it's got a couple different titles. The understanding is that at that level, you're not expected just to be the individual, rock star. You might be, that's probably a good thing, but how do you actually impact other people? How do you lead other people in that technical solution? And I think the major difference that a lot of companies, ours included, sort of distinguish between that technical track and the technical leadership versus the management leadership is focusing on the technical outcome versus focusing on building a team that delivers a technical outcome. And I think the manager role is a lot more about the team building, and the individual contributor role is a lot more about the sort of a different kind of power, and not so much through the formal team structure, but more through the influencing and driving direction and alignment. So there's a lot of similarities. I think the major difference is sort of how you accomplish those leadership goals depending on the path you're on.
I thank you so much for kind of diving into that, because it sounds like something that seems kind of it seems like common sense, but it didn't appear that clear from the jump. So thank you so much for kind of diving into that, because you're right, there are a lot of similarities between the two. All right, this question came in and was much more personally specific, but I do still think it really applies, and probably a lot of people will be able to relate to this. This person said, I excel as an individual contributor and I master new skills quickly, but then I get bored and I need a new challenge. I don't quite enjoy the high-level managerial overview, but I dearly love working with individuals and with a high level of engagement. Does this mean I should shift my goals towards a managerial role, or is there a better way to avoid boredom as an individual contributor?
Well, if I could jump into my crazy career path.
Yeah.
I have long joked boredom is the enemy. That is probably the driving force of every career change I've made. But there's a lot of paths beyond. I mean, the answer is maybe, I guess, right? So it is possible that if you're feeling like you need a new challenge, the right next challenge is to do something in that managerial track. I mean, to a leadership skill development standpoint, it can be a good path. But a lot of times I think people are, some of the best, hands down, some of the best career moves I made were ones that were switching from an area of technical expertise to one that was a little bit outside of my lane, not like 100%, but just a little bit. And then building some expertise in that area. And I actually think if your goal is to ultimately move up to that more senior level, even on the individual contributor track, there's a lot of benefit to doing those breadth development. There's some folks in the industry will talk about a T-shaped talent. And what they mean is if you take the letter T, right? The idea is that across the top of the T, you have lots of area of breadth, but then you have one area of sort of deep expertise. And then if you keep going, you can have a H-shaped talent, or, I don't know, different letters or whatever. But the idea there is, I think, a really solid one for a career development path, which is if you've already built out an area of expertise, sometimes the next best thing to do is to pick another area adjacent to what you currently work on and start building some new expertise. It solves the boredom problem. And I think ultimately it also helps you build good breadth. And I think the other thing I'll say is that sometimes this hits to sometimes a gender specific thing, like women want to be 100%, like you want to nail it before you apply for that job. And I think I benefited in my career by having some good career mentors who pushed me to take them, even when I had a lot of self-doubt that I was capable of doing this thing that obviously wasn't my expertise, right? So my encouragement is to look for those opportunities and to have the courage to take them when they present themselves.
I love that. And you're right. It is very, it's one of those things that you, especially having sat through as many of these as I do, that are all about, career development and that kind of stuff, taking a job that you can do, like, that 100% of the job you can do, or you have experience, or you have done before, to me is horrible, because it's boring. You're going to get in there, and as soon as you're up to speed, it's not a challenge anymore. And I'm very similar to this person where, like, I like the new challenge, but I have to keep kind of challenging myself within the role that I'm in. Dileshni, do you identify at all with this person and their like kind of need to keep things interesting?
Yeah, I definitely do. I have the same problem. If I get bored, I get very itchy. I'm like, okay, what's my next thing? I can't do the same thing forever. But I wanted to touch on something else that this person may have mentioned is like, if you, when I have engineers who come to me and say, is management the next move for me because I'm bored or something, kind of ask questions about why you want to move into management. Like, I think this individual may have mentioned, like, they're interested in helping others. Is that something that they want to focus more of their time doing? Because for managers, it's a lot about coaching and growing your team. Is that where you want to shift your focus towards, or do you want to move to a different domain area and build up your technical skills there? So that's like a good question to kind of ask yourself and think about before deciding management or IC track. And even as a manager, it's a personal story. Like right now with Rundeck, I am touching a lot of infrastructure level changes my group is doing. This is outside of my area of expertise, and I'm learning, and it feels uncomfortable. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to learn from my engineers. I'm going to learn from my peers, my other managers at PagerDuty. So this is something that you get to do as managers as well, not just ICs.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I absolutely love that, your take on this. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about, what being an IC versus being a manager means. Obviously, this can change kind of, company to company or even department to department, but do you think that you still get the same say in decision making as like a senior individual contributor as you would as a manager? Or do you think that it's kind of comparing like apples to giraffes? Like, is it one of those things that you really can't compare the two?
I think you have the same say. Like, this comes back to maybe the managers into your company. Like I see individual senior ICs as having equal say in decision making. I see senior ICs as partners, like they're my partners, like, with the team, how we grow, what are the decisions we make, we kind of bounce ideas off of each other. To me, yeah, they have equal say, but maybe less. The engineers have more of a say in the technical decision making, whereas the manager will have more of a say in the how you set up the team, how you grow the team, what kind of levels you include in the team, things like that.
So would you say it's more about kind of having the last word when it comes to like the broad strokes of what's to be accomplished, and then the engineers are more about how that's going to be accomplished among the team?
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, great. Paula, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
No, I mean, I think that was a lot of, I would just say it's the same. It's not that it's different decisions that you own, right? I say, like, sort of technical leadership is a lot about owning that technical decision, technical direction, architecture, sort of the vision of what you're going to build and how you're going to build it. The management, a lot of times I sort of mentioned to my own managers, is reminding them that when you're the manager, you don't own the work, you own the system of work. So you own creating the conditions for a team to successfully get it done, and not to be the one to actually get your hands in there. And I think at the first level of management, you do get your hands dirty a little bit, right? You're close enough to the team that, you're probably closer to the decisions that the team is making. But as you move up, the management path, once you jump on that path, it's a lot more about creating the conditions for the team's success. And it's, you need to get yourself out of the management. And I think that's probably the hardest transition that people have between those two roles of going from an individual contributor to a manager, is to take your hands off the keyboard and let your team do it, because nobody wants to be I think most people don't like to be micromanaged. I suppose there are a few people who do like that, but so don't be the manager that does your team's job for them, right? How do you help them be successful? And it is kind of a different way of thinking about what you own in terms of decisions.
I absolutely love that. There's always, it doesn't matter how many of these I sit through, there's always at least one point in every one of these chats where I'm like, oh my God, how have I never thought of it like that before? So thank you, Paula. That bit about, owning the work versus owning the system that supports the work is, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. All right, let's talk about some of the challenges. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most common challenges that you face as a manager versus as an IC? We had a lot of people that wanted to know, how to handle those challenges, if your advice is different depending on the role, what works, what doesn't, that kind of stuff. So let's start to explore that. Have you seen, or do you think there's a big difference between the most common challenges as a manager versus an IC?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, hands down, the most common challenge as a manager is people. Like, that is the biggest distinction. I mean, it's true in most companies, right? That management has people management and individual contributor. There are some cases where individual contributor does have, like, maybe a small team, like dotted line or something, but usually individual contributor does not have people management. And that's always kind of a litmus test that I put people through that want to go into management, is how much do you enjoy working with people, leading people, developing people, and then solving people problems? Because that is actually, I think, the hardest part of the management. And perhaps it's just like being an engineer. Like, if I tell a computer to do something, it does what I told it to do, even if I told it to do something stupid. Humans break in all sorts of ways. They do all sorts of crazy things. I think I have seen every people problem on the planet, and then a new one comes at me. So there's just more dynamic going on to the people side, I think, which I find interesting. And that's, obviously why I've, chosen to abandon a career of coding into the world of management. But I think that's probably the main distinction, though, I would say. And your enjoyment of that type of problems will usually be whether you enjoy being a manager or not, for a lot of people.
Thank you for sharing that, Paula. Dileshni, how about you? Do you agree with what Paula had said?
Yeah, it's definitely the people side. And then I would also say it's like context switching. There's so much context switching as a manager. especially even just during like one-on-ones, right? Like if you go to a one-on-one with an engineer, maybe they open up about some challenging thing that they're doing, maybe a personal challenge, and you talk through it, and then you have to move to a different one-on-one, and that has to be compartmentalized because you can't move that from one to another. You have to give your full attention to the next engineer. And so you have to be able to switch context, and maybe you'll go from one-on-ones to like talking to a group of leaders about like the next project and, you know, pitching how we get to the next stage. So being able to switch on and off completely, being able to compartmentalize is very important as a manager.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've talked a lot about, you know, some of the various things that you should know about, you know, one side versus the other. When is it a good time to evaluate whether or not to make that move? You know, is it a specific point in a person's career ladder? Is it, you know, should you start thinking about this, you know, even if you work at a smaller company that might not have an opening for something like this? We got a lot of questions from people around this idea of like how to decide, or when should you start thinking about this? Do either of you have any suggestions, or, you know, this is what I did versus maybe don't do it like I did? You know, I'm really interested to hear what your opinions are on this, like apparently very crucial or very pivotal point for people. Dileshni, do you want to start us off here?
Sure. I'm going to answer this in like how I did it. It was basically when I had to sit down at the end of the year and be like, what are the things I enjoy doing about my role, and what are the things that are giving me energy? And I found that I still remember when I was a senior engineer at a previous company, and some of my time was actually spent answering questions from the junior engineers about like, hey, what does my career look like? I want to make it to the next level, but I don't know how. Should I have this conversation with my manager? I remember like sitting on a park bench and like talking to one of the junior engineers who was like, how does my career grow? How do I have that conversation? And I found like thinking about helping others on my team and helping out, how do we grow the team so that they're able to do their best job? Like, what are some of the issues that are holding us back from being able to do our job, was what I enjoyed thinking about. And that's when I realized, okay, I want to focus more on like the engineering management side versus the individual contributor. To me, some of the coding side wasn't as exciting anymore after 10 years of doing it. So that's the way I thought about it.
I guess if I reflect on how I got there, I'm not sure that it's reproducible sometimes. But I would say, like, I think there's maybe a little bit of almost like a minimum. Like, I do think I always sort of have like, you tend to really need at least like 18 months to 2 years in a role to really like, you know, like to really solidly sort of have an impact in that role. And I'm not saying that you can't jump outside of that, but that to me is a little bit of a floor of like, a lot of times I see people and they're like, when you're in, they're ready for the next thing. And it's like, you know, there's a certain amount of benefit of staying in a role for a little bit longer and really nailing it before you kind of jump onto the next thing. But I also think sometimes there's some benefit of just being opportunistic. Like, when is the right, like sometimes you're waiting for like, you know, you kind of have in your mind the sorts of things you want to work on, and something comes up, and having the sort of raise your hand, or, you know, communicating to both your manager, but also maybe their peers, like, this is the kinds of thing I'm looking for if this comes up, like kind of getting the word out that these are the sort of challenges you're up for next. I would say what happened in my career in terms of bouncing between individual contributor and manager was, I was at first very resistant. I didn't actually want to be a manager. I was an individual contributor. I would end up in team lead role. There was a time where I thought, well, okay, fine, I'll be the manager. I did it for a very short period of time with my boss and said, no, I don't want to do it anymore. I want to go back to coding. Went back to coding. I did that again. I was on a project manager quit. And I said, well, you know how to do this. Why don't you be the manager again? So that happened like 3 different times where I kept getting bumped into this management role. I don't want to do this. Why do you keep giving me this management role? But it was good in that, in doing those roles for the short period of times as sort of a temporary thing, was a way for me to gain some of those skills on a temporary project. And then I, you know, kind of went back in, you know, to the sort of individual contributor ladder. And I was actually like an architect, I would say equivalent would be staff engineer, title wise. in an organization when I kind of really got pushed over into the management one. And at the time I had kind of gone to my boss and said, I'm ready for the next thing. I need something new. And he came back with this management opportunity. And my first reaction was, I don't think you heard me. I didn't say I wanted to be a manager. Like I wanted a new thing. I don't want to be a manager. What do you like? This is the opposite of what I just told you I wanted. Yeah, but it was a great opportunity. And I had to be talked into it, but it was an excellent opportunity for me from a skill building standpoint. And I think an example of those situations where you take a role where it's that 50% stretch, that's a little bit of what you're bringing and a little bit of what you're learning. So, I think once I did that role, then I realized that this was something I enjoyed, and there was a reason people were nudging me in that direction. And I had been in IC for a long time, right? So I had plenty of, individual contributor years under my belt at that point. So I didn't feel like I was, I'd had a pretty healthy career up until that point. So it was probably the right time to pivot. But I think sometimes, sometimes the right moment is when the right opportunity presents itself too. So kind of knowing what skills you want to work on and what kinds of challenges you want is probably more important than necessarily fixating on the specific role or title.
Okay. Now, do either of you feel like there was maybe once the tipping point passed and it was kind of like, okay, well, heading into management is probably what's going to happen here, probably what I think I want to do. At any point did y'all work on maybe not necessarily formal, but some type of a flexible timeline or a plan to make that transition? Or was it kind of like you said, Paula, it's one of those things that if you are waiting for the right opportunity, then you can kind of just jump on whatever the timeline is for that opportunity?
I can speak to things that I did that didn't work and that has worked. So when I originally wanted to focus on engineering management, I actually talked to my boss's boss at the time, because I saw that we didn't have a formal eng manager role. So I was like, hey, I could see that the teams were just not functioning the way that we were set up. It wasn't set up to scale. So I kind of pitched hey, I think we should switch the teams to this kind of structure. And I would really like to take on the opportunity of focusing on managing and growing that team. That didn't go well. I didn't get the role. I did get the role 9 months later. But I did put myself out there. It was really uncomfortable having that conversation. But that's something I should encourage everyone to do, is even though it's hard, you should talk to your managers about what are the things that are important to you, what kind of things you want to focus on. Give your manager the opportunity to help you figure out what that next step is. And the other things I've done is also, my manager suggested this, is if you're at a point and you feel like you want to do something different, not really sure how, think about 1 year from now, what your performance review would be like. What are the things you've accomplished? And kind of work backwards from that to set checkpoints, goals from there. And maybe that could be, managing teams or growing teams, or it could be leading a project as a senior IC. It could be something like that.
I love that. I love that different way of looking at it and thinking of it, instead of in terms of here's where I am, where do I want to go? Think of it in terms of, okay, where do I want to go? Now let's work backwards. I think that's a really good tip for people. Thank you so much, Dileshni, for sharing that. I think that's great. We have some questions coming in the chat thread, so I want to make sure we get to some of those. Emmy, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Emmy had asked, what is your recommendation when your employees aren't meeting deadlines or completing projects? While as a manager, like you said, we're not supposed to work on the details of the project ourselves, but when your direct report isn't doing a good job, does that mean that maybe being an IC is more your speed, or is a better position for you?
I guess what I'll answer to that is the system of work is the people doing the work, right? So if somebody on the team is not performing, you need to address sort of the performance issue. Sometimes you need to address the system that they're performing in. Sometimes it's not the person, it's the environment they're working in that needs to get fixed. But either of those are things that you are still accountable for the results, right? That's a really scary thing about being a manager. You're accountable for the results, but you don't do the work, right? And that's a little bit of a leap of faith. I like to describe it more positively as living vicariously through your team. But that is something that like you still kind of own that outcome, and there is a space you have to get comfortable with when you get into management that, like I say, it's this really hard transition. I struggled with it, I'm not gonna lie, of letting people accomplish a thing, you know, that they're set to do their way. And that's especially hard when their way is not your way. But if you're aligned on the outcome that they're working towards and they get to that outcome and they stay sort of, you know, within a, you know, they don't break the law or do something unethical or whatever, right? There's obviously some bounds that people can't go out of. You know, there's something to like seeing a team, you know, come up with a way to solve a problem and go solve it. It is a hard part. And I guess if you would have a hard time having, you know, the difficult people conversations, I mean, it's a skill. So I wouldn't say don't do it because you don't know how to do it, because obviously you have to learn how to have hard people conversations. But that is an aspect of it. And that's why I kind of say the people thing is the manager distinction. If those are the, if having the one-on-ones and the hard, courageous conversations sound like a nightmare to you, probably not management may not be for you.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very good rule of thumb. You know, these things that generally come up, just because you don't know how to do them yet doesn't mean you can't learn. But if this is something that's going to be pulling teeth for you and it is not anything that you want to even touch, yeah, maybe not. All right, we do have one more question from the chat. Leanne is asking, do either of you have an opinion on the minimum amount of time an IC should be an IC before going into management? Or is it less about the amount of time and more about having the skills or the willingness to learn? I think this is a really interesting question because I've had managers that knew exactly what I was doing because they'd held my job before, and I had managers that have not. And personally, I don't know that there's really been any pattern to them, but I'm also not in engineering. So what are y'all's opinions on this? Dileshni, do you want to start?
So my opinion is like not based on X number of years. I think two things are important is that you should have been an IC for long enough to see some of the impact of the technical decisions you make. Like Paula mentioned before, like, you know, 2 years in a role or something like that, because you will see as the scale of your company or your project grows, like the decisions you made may have hit some sort of boundary and now you have to change it. You learn a lot from it, and that helps when you're coaching your engineers, and you also when you're setting some guardrails in place for your teams. And the second part is around, part of my job is also managing senior ICs. I think being a senior IC has really helped because I can kind of understand what to look for in that role, especially when I'm promoting people, but also in terms of like, I can empathize with some of the situations there and like, you know, what kind of skills that are important to them when they're collaborating with teams or when they have to communicate out. So I think those two are important. So it depends on each individual and kind of their career and situation they've been in. So having those two, I find is very important when you're switching to being a manager.
Yeah, I think that perspective would be very important. Paula, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I share that. I mean, I think there's sometimes certain companies have roles that are sort of like a smaller scoped project, you know, or program manager where maybe less people responsibilities or maybe people responsibilities, but not as much project execution responsibility. So sometimes there's opportunities to do a management role that's not as large, but I do think it takes some experience in your career and levels of seniority because there is that context. So I do sort of think that that context is valuable. And you know, I also think the sort of breadth is important too. But that said, to the learning things as a manager, one of those management things you'll have to learn eventually is how to manage a team where you're not the expert on what they do. You know, that was a pivot point for me at one point in my management career, was leading a team where I couldn't do their job. You know, their area of expertise was not mine. So that is a thing you can learn. So I wouldn't let that be the impediment. But I do think having that well-roundedness of having a solid technical career is beneficial. That's just what I mean, is that there are some people who jump right to the management path, but I really think you benefit from having some solid individual contributor technical skills under your belt first.
I can add to that is part of being an IC for a while is you pick up the patterns. The patterns are the same, but maybe the programming language or the tool you use is very different. So you can apply those patterns to when your team runs into problems. So that's kind of what I mean about like, seeing that impact of your decisions.
Okay, I like that. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left. I know we like to save about 5 minutes at the end to talk a little bit more in depth about PagerDuty, open roles, that kind of thing. Before we get into that, I do want to try and cover a little bit more about that transition between IC into management. So we had one person that had asked that they say that they find that manager roles in their field are much more difficult to find than IC roles. And they think that it's because companies are more likely to promote from within. Now, obviously you guys can't speak to what every company is doing, but has that been your experience that most management people come out of the teams that they will manage or come out of the same org?
That's generally true. I think there's two factors probably. One is almost just sort of math. There is usually one manager to a team of between 5 and 10 people. So just ratio wise, there are usually less managers than individual contributors. I think the other reason is I do think people, many companies, invest in promoting from within. And I actually say that I was glad to have done the management transition in the context of a company that I already worked for with a mentor that I already knew, that, I had a really great relationship that could sort of, because the first year as a manager can be a little rockier. So there's some benefit of that, but that doesn't mean, there's plenty of situations where the transition can be company to company if there's the support structure in place to do that. So that's my hypothesis of why that's the case. But I think a lot of it is just, look, engineering organizations, the primary thing we hire are engineers. So.
Makes sense to me. Dileshni, anything to add?
Just one thing is like, I've noticed is it's if you've been an engineer at a company for a while, the systems in place, moving to a parallel kind of work where you're managing the people, it's less risky from the company's point of view versus hiring in someone who's new, who don't know the people and don't know the systems. So I think that might be why companies are more likely to promote from within.
That makes a ton of sense, yeah. We also had a lot of questions from people about kind of hybrid roles. So we had a couple of questions from people who said that they've turned down managerial roles previously, but that now yes, they want to they want to work towards that at some point, but maybe it's not top of mind right now. We also had another person that said, they're taking over an interim management role with an opportunity to move into a full-time role there if they perform well or if they are still interested in continuing it. So a lot of it was about kind of being able to keep your options open and wanting to have that freedom to either, readdress this idea of moving into management at a later date, or address the idea of, maybe wanting to take a step back into IC if you don't want to, if it turns out that management isn't really for you. Do you have any suggestions for these people? Like, they had questions from everything about, how to keep your skills sharp while you are a manager to like how to approach this idea with your manager of like, I don't want to do this now, but I would like to work towards it later. Are these difficult questions or difficult subjects to discuss with your manager or with the higher ups at your company?
I think of it as, the management role has a lot of various skills that you might not touch in the IC role. And so if you think about it from a skill building standpoint, the interim, I obviously that's what I did. So I think the interim idea is a great one. But I think it's good. The reason it's good sometimes too is I had roles where I was leading a team, but I wasn't the people manager. But then I had other roles where I was people manager, but there was somebody else leading. Or I had roles where, so my early, management roles were like a slice of the sort of complete picture of manager. And they weren't necessarily titled manager, but that was a good way of skill building. And if you think about the skills you're going to get in that role and what you need to work on, rather than the title or the job thing. I think sometimes that's a better path to, kind of how you grow your skills in your career. And then when you do have the opportunity to do sort of the full package, then the amount of things you're trying to learn in this new role is a lot less, and it makes it a lot more successful. So I think the ways you can gain some of those skills along the path are kind of a good path. I mean, somebody asked too in the question, like courses or training, and I struggle a little bit with like a third party. A lot of companies do have, I know PagerDuty does, I'm sure other companies do have like leadership development training. I would definitely search around and advocate for what's available in your company for leadership training, even if you're in IC now. See if you can take those, early management training classes. I think there are some other platforms, be that like the LinkedIn Learning platform or, some of the other online platforms that do have some other like leadership development, even things like financial management or people management. So there's a little bit of that. I do feel like a lot of management is frankly just like engineering. You just got to do it. The only way to learn it is to do it. So I would certainly, those classes are nice complements, but I would certainly advocate more for finding roles where you can exercise a part of the skill so that you're ready to exercise the whole package later.
I like that. I like that approach to it. Dileshni, do you agree with this?
Yeah, totally do. If there are some like resources that I usually recommend folks who say they are interested in becoming managers, there's a book called Manager's Path by Camille Fournier. It's a really, really good book. It talks about the IC track as well as the manager track and what each role, like what you should expect. It usually opens up people's eyes to like, what does a manager actually do? What does a VP of engineering actually do? So that's a really good book to read. And also Lara Hogan and Jen Terry, I think is her last name. They have newsletters that talk about like different management skills and how to have crucial conversations and challenging conversations, how to go about giving feedback. Those are like, newsletter tidbits that are super useful. And they also run some training sessions for like newer managers and also senior ICs. Especially for senior ICs, I would definitely recommend looking into how you give feedback, because a lot of your responsibilities are also growing, junior engineers. So giving feedback is a really important skill for everybody.
I love that. And actually, we've got a bunch of people in the chat, asking what the book title was and all that kind of stuff. So Dileshni, I'll remind you in our emails back and forth after this, so we can get those notes, and we'll include that on the rewatch email for people, as well as I think we usually save it with the video description as well. So thank you for suggesting those. We don't have a ton of time left, so I want to make sure we get to a couple more questions here. One of the really popular questions that we got a lot was about, what were some of your unexpected challenges, that kind of thing. Since you both are women in what can be a very male-dominated setting a lot of the time, I'd really like to know if you faced any struggles specific to this, either with, managing male direct reports or just being in a more, male-dominated system. Were there any management challenges that you faced that you really felt were specific because you were a woman in this situation?
Definitely. It is not easy being a woman and like person of color in a male dominated industry. I'm not gonna lie. It is very important to have a good support system. I've been very, very fortunate to build that support system with friends, with women in tech. They're really helpful when you're feeling like really stuck and you feel like I don't follow the same communication model that maybe majority of men follow. I'm not super loud, or not very pushy. I have a very different leadership style. And early on in my career, I was just like, do I have to kind of change my way? And a lot of what I had a coach, and a lot of what I worked with her was about like finding out what my leadership style is and being comfortable with it. So as a woman or like any underrepresented community, I would say it's a lot about like being comfortable and confident in yourself and knowing that you may not lead the same way everyone else in that room would.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's a great flag. Yeah. Just because you're not going to do it the same as they would have does not make your approach wrong.
Exactly.
I would say, I mean, so the answer is sort of like, well, of course, I've been in the technical field for 25 years, and yes, there's challenges being a female in the industry. I think probably the more amusing one was a point where when I was like a chief architect, I ended up with 5, males who were all older than me, and none of them had ever worked for a female boss before, and all of them were highly skeptical of this entire scenario to start with. And so there is always a little bit of like questioning your technical acumen that I found was a little bit challenging, or your style. I mean, as Dileshni referenced, right, that there was an expectation of either maybe an opinion about how women led, or or they didn't lead, or whatever. There's always, I'll say the witch word sometimes if you feel like you're too forceful. But I'll say that the positive side, that there is kind of a strength in it as well. And that I found that to the point of sort of finding your style and kind of owning it, there was a point in which I tried to sort of say, well, I'm in this male industry, I need to lead like a guy. And that's not my style. And you will, I think, like embrace the strength of being a female in a male-oriented industry too. Like there are some, especially a lot of things I've led have been sort of change management things. And I think had I brought in like a style, anything other than what I, sort of that I have, I think it would have been harder. And so I think there's a path to benefit to bring your leadership style and not having to conform to the industry norm too. So for as much it has also showed up in a few places as challenges, I think it also brings strength. So I think my encouragement is, don't feel like you need to change yourself or your style to be successful in spite of, the industry we operate in.
Okay. All right. One last question, and then we'll shift on into some PagerDuty stuff. What do you think, obviously, hindsight's always 2020, but what do you think, looking back, was one of the most important or one of the most useful things you did to help with that transition, or to ease your transition into a managerial role from being an IC?
Good question. Part of me, for what I realized that was important, is what I think Paula mentioned, is learning to not jump in and like be the person that tries to solve problems. It is really hard when you've been in IC, especially if you're managing the team that maybe you were part of before, which was my case. It was just taking a step back, and I had to learn how to ask questions and to coach my engineers in figuring out the solution and the path they wanted to take, not the path I wanted to take, because I might not know the right answer, or my answer might not be the best one. So you got to help your engineers figure out what the best solution for it is. It's like what's it called? Open and honest questions. It's the way that has been framed in the past. But knowing how to answer those kind of questions has been really helpful for me.
Oh, I like that. Thank you both for sharing. Okay, so we're going to go into what I want to share with y'all now. The screen that you're looking at here is a set of questions that we posed to Dileshni and Paula about PagerDuty, the company culture, all that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit about your favorite parts of working at PagerDuty. A ton of the time, people say that it's, it's the people, it's the coworkers, and that is always, I think it's a perennial favorite answer because it's just so true, right? But let's talk a little bit about, what those people and what the attitude and the culture is at PagerDuty that makes it, that makes the people, kind of your favorite part. Let's talk a little bit about what that environment feels like. Paula, you had said that you described the company culture as open. Can you elaborate on that for us a little bit?
Yeah, one of my very first companies, the motto was actually honesty and service, and that company doesn't exist anymore, or it's been acquired through multiple times. But I think that openness, I do mean that sort of like honesty openness, that there is just a very sort of people are very authentic, and they bring a real transparency to things, and there's a willingness to have hard conversations. And it's actually really hard. It's hard to have that kind of culture. And so I think that's a really, maybe just because I grew up sort of my management chops in that type of culture, it's a really constructive culture because it takes a lot of the, if you can bring yourself and have a hard conversation, especially from a manager standpoint, probably, I think that's probably true for an individual contributor as well, but especially for a manager, it's a much more conducive environment to leadership, I think.
Excellent. Okay. Dileshni, you had talked a lot about that collaboration and a collaborative atmosphere. Can you give us an example of a way that you've seen that really displayed, or something that really highlighted that aspect of PagerDuty for you?
And so it's a lot about like every project that I've worked on, if it's like technical project or across the group, across the org. Like even this morning, two of my senior ICs and I had a quick chat about like, okay, we have to create this design document for one of our projects. We're like, okay, what do we want to address? How do we share this? And how do we help support each other? And like no question is a dumb question. We can ask each other questions. You can ask anybody any question about their project and they're so willing to answer it. It is such a nice thing to have. When in the past as an IC, I've had like, senior engineers be like, why do you want to know this? That would never be asked at PagerDuty. It's because of how supportive everyone is, and they just want everyone to learn and grow.
I absolutely love that. It's one of those things that you hear about another company, and even though it's not something that like work that I want to do, I would absolutely recommend that to somebody else. If I knew somebody who was looking for engineering roles, I'd be like, oh yeah, I heard this great stuff about PagerDuty. Like, you should absolutely go check that out. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. It's always good to get that kind of inside look that you might be told about during like a recruitment session or in an interview or something, but it's quite another to hear it from somebody who is actually like boots on the ground experiencing it. All right. So one thing I do want to highlight before we run out of time today is obviously PagerDuty is hiring. I put a link into the chat where you can check out PagerDuty's company page on powertofly.com. The roles that you see here are some of their highlighted roles that we wanted to focus on. But there are, 61 roles that are currently posted with Power to Fly for PagerDuty. So if you are, interested in learning more about the org or looking to see if any of these roles would suit you, definitely take a look at those at the link that I put in the chat. And actually, Mia from PagerDuty also put in links in the chat to learn more about, some of their featured jobs with PagerDuty. So thank you, Mia, for sharing that with us. One thing that I want to leave time to say thanks to everybody before we go, but Paula and Dileshni, thank you both to each of you for taking the time to spend with us today. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to say before we jump? Any last minute words of advice to our attendees who are, kind of looking at this choice and looking at these options in terms of their career futures?
I think I'll just finish with we are actually hiring both. I think we highlighted both the manager role, and we've got a couple, as well as some individual contributor roles. So we would be happy to be considered for your next career jump, and it's a great environment, I think, for growing. So thanks for everyone for coming. It was nice to see a good size audience and some great questions.
Same, yeah, and if one thing I had mentioned before was having a good support system. Like maybe you want to talk to your support system about like, hey, I want to have this conversation with my manager. What do you think if I say X, Y, Z? And if you want to talk to me about it, feel free to like message me on LinkedIn or something. I would be happy to chat.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much for offering that as a resource for our attendees today. Huge thank you to PagerDuty for loaning you to us for the afternoon. I know that there's a lot of prep work that goes into these things. It's not just the hour that you see, us chatting in front of you. So huge thank you, Dileshni and Paula. It's been absolutely wonderful to spend the afternoon with you. And then, like they said, great questions from the audience. So thank you so much for all of our attendees, everybody that registered and asked questions, people that came and asked questions live. These are great. It always kind of makes these events feel a little bit more personable, a little bit more interactive. So we obviously greatly encourage that. We have some really amazing conversations happening the rest of this week, as well as next month. We're getting all geared up for our next mini summit that's happening at the end of November. So hopefully y'all will join us for some of those. But in case we don't see you around anytime soon, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Monday and a good week, safe, happy, healthy. And we can't wait to see you whenever you do join us next. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Bye.
Yeah.